Welcome to the premiere episode of The History of Things with Al and Johnny.
Hi, I'm Al.
The reason it's not Johnny and Al is because Al is a narcissist that needs to have his name first.
It's true.
No, it's because it sounds better.
No. It's because I think I own everything. I like to push people around. It's good.
And I just let him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a large size disparity between the two of us, and so I push him around quite a bit.
Yeah.
But he's a lot funnier than me, so people like him a lot better.
I don't know about that. I definitely get a lot more reactions.
It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
So, and like the title says, what we're going to be doing is going through the timelines of things, the history of them.
Right.
And one thing at a time.
Exactly.
And this premiere episode, we decided to do coffee.
Right.
And we found out that it's quite a task. There's a lot of history in coffee.
Right. Well, one thing I kind of learned about the whole setup, though, is that we're not going to be an encyclopedia, because you could probably find an encyclopedia. But how about we're going to break it down for the good stuff?
Yeah.
Get right to the meat of what you want to know about things like coffee.
Yeah, and even with coffee, the thing is, it's such a big history. I mean,
Yes.
for the past 14, over 1,000 years, let's say, there's so many different threads going on and so many different side stories. And there's something over here. There's a revolution going on over here, and this guy's introducing it to the United States, and that guy, he's making a fortune over here in Venice and this and that. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to give you the most of what we can. And whatever we leave out, if you don't like that, you can always send us an angry email.
Right.
And we'd be happy to read that for you.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to be all over the angry emails, which is fine. Well, I love coffee, and I know you love coffee because we have done some other things before, and one of the things you like to do is take a little sip of coffee, so let's go ahead. Well, you know what? It never sounds the same twice, but you always have that same look of just like the world of happiness exploded. We were talking about this before, and about how much you love coffee, and how much you always. He's got a little like French press right next to us. That
I love this thing so much.
Yeah, that his coffee. And we were discussing about if we were going to do the history of things, what would we want to talk about most?
Yeah,
and it seemed pretty dang obvious.
Yeah, what else are we gonna do?
I mean, really, there's lots of things. There's, millions and billions and trillions of things in the planet, but our days start with coffee. So we thought, where does this stuff come from? Where's this wonderful dark juice of greatness come through?
Yeah, black juice.
Black juice of greatness.
And I realized researching that, oh man, there's a rich history.
Yeah.
There's a rich, bold, flavorful aroma of history.
It's true. And I found that, so we made a little history. We'll tell you all about it. And it starts with a goat.
A goat herder.
Yes.
And his goats.
And his goats. Well, I mean, some people think it starts with the goat itself, but some people said it was goat herder. But we looked at a lot of different places, and the same general idea keeps coming up over and over again.
There's a general idea, and we're talking the 9th century.
Yes.
Right? So,
right around there.
So there's no written record of this. This is all a myth, a story that's kind of been collected from different areas, and it's a general idea that most people agree upon. More as a story than as we'll get to the hard evidence. That's a few hundred years later.
Right.
But yeah, the first thing, Caldi, the famous story, the famous origins of coffee starts with Caldi the goat herder, and there's probably some truth to it. But what happened was Caldi noticed that his goats weren't getting much sleep at night.
Right.
And one day he noticed that they were chomping on these berries, these red little berries, and so he decided to try some for himself to see what was going on.
Right. And whenever I hear about the happy goat, I remember seeing a YouTube video where there's like little baby goats jumping and bouncing off of each other all the time. It's adorable.
Yeah.
So I picture this, but I guess the goat couldn't get to sleep, and that Caldi just decided that he was going to try and use these berries to keep himself up, I guess, at that point.
Yeah. And again, this is tough because there's a lot of different stories here.
Right. There was kind of like, who was the actual guy? Where he came from? Was it the goat, or was it just the guy just picked a berry and ate it and went, wow? So
yeah, right. And so, but the idea is that he tried them, said this is great. He took him to a monastery,
right.
A bunch of monks with his discovery, and they said, no, I don't know. We don't like this.
Right.
This is not good.
Right. Even though at a lot of monasteries they have wine,
Yeah.
apparently they're not okay with something that makes you up instead of like down.
Yeah, the drunken monk said, "What do you get this elixir out of here?"
Exactly.
Yeah. So eventually, as the story goes, they threw him in the fire to get rid of him. The fire. This is one of the stories we heard. The fire actually, the smell of coffee came out,
Yes.
and they said, "Whoa! Hold on a second. We got to try that."
Because it smelled so good.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I'm just picturing coffee in the morning
Yeah,
right now.
yeah. And so there's a bunch of different versions of that story, but that's one of them. And the truth is, coffee was probably tried by people eventually in Ethiopia. This is where it all started. And people agree that it's Ethiopia.
Yeah.
And a lot of these traditions go on to this day. But eventually, they didn't make it into a drink initially. I think they grounded them up, and they supposedly in their the ghee that they had, which is like butter, they'd mix them together and use them as like an energy bar.
Right. Oh, right.
Right. Which sounds today like some sort of paleo diet snack or something. And
Right.
actually sounds pretty tasty.
So I guess coffee was just accepted that it was going to be around Ethiopia. In fact, in about 1000 A.D., the I don't know how to pronounce his name because Avicenna.
Yeah, it's Avicenna.
Yes.
Bukhara.
Yeah, Bukhara, and he was like the Doogie Howser MD of his time.
Yeah, young philosopher, physician,
Right.
real smart guy.
When we're saying young, we're not talking today's time young. Like he was 16 and he was a full-on like king's physician at 18.
Yeah.
So he was, he was really smart guy, and he wrote one of the first people to really write down descriptions of how things were in the body and how, how medicines worked. And one of the things that he talked about was the benefits of these beans.
Yeah, and they don't. They think it's coffee. It's not 100%, but they're pretty sure what he was talking about was coffee.
Right.
And he described the medicinal properties of it.
Right.
And eventually, coffee for a long time became known as kind of a cure-all.
Right.
It was the snake oil of its day.
It has the same effects almost a lot like aspirin, because it expands the capillaries and does all kinds of stuff, so it can get rid of headaches. It will, it can wake you up in the morning. It will fight off. They used to have fatigue and malaise was a major difficulty at the time. And it was just basically people worked really hard and were dying tired.
Yeah.
So this was something that would fight off the malaise of the day.
Yeah.
So jumping forward to more around 1100, right? That's when, so they had coffee, right? And then they started trading it, and it started to go around, because the bushes, we eventually found out it could only grow in like certain conditions, really specific conditions.
Right.
So it went around the Arab countries, and they started making it into a beverage. Which wasn't just eating the berries, because I don't know if you've ever had one of these coffee berries.
Never have.
They're bitter. I had one over in Kauai, and it's disgusting. They are absolutely horrible. But if you put chocolate on it, they're nice. As long as you do something with them, they're pretty good, right? So they started getting around, and eventually, around mid-1400s, they actually made it all the way over to Turkey, the Ottoman Turks, and all the way to Constantinople.
Yeah.
And so they made coffee houses and all that stuff.
Yeah, and supposedly the world's first coffee house opened in 1475, which is called the Kivahan.
Right.
And right away, coffee becomes this hotspot for intellectual discussion, debate, government, politics, that kind of a thing. And as coffee's right away, it's stimulating your mind, and people are getting together, it's social, and people are talking about it.
Right. And so at this point, they started calling it the wine of Araby.
Really?
Right? So they call it the wine of Araby because it's just that blending kind of social lubricant that we think of with wine. And they even called the little coffee houses, they called them schools of the wise. So it's like all the smart people were getting together and talking, and I think that kind of upset some people because they didn't want them to get there, because they wanted them to go to like church or Mecca and talk about religion. They didn't want them to go to coffee houses, have their brain stimulated and talk about things that could be something else. So
like uprisings and
exactly
unseating political people.
I mean, French Revolution, they got together at coffee houses and all that stuff. So it's this. We've seen what's happened now in the future, but at the time they could see that something was awry with these coffee houses.
Yeah, and coffee it became very popular very fast. I mean, the Quran forbids alcoholic beverages.
Right.
Coffee was perfect. It was a stimulant, and it was really popular. In fact, so much so, eventually around that time, there was a Turkish law that was made that made it legal for a woman to divorce her husband if he fails to provide the proper coffee quota. So it was very popular and played a big role in the culture.
Right. So yeah, and in fact, I mean, it was illegal, but the divorce was illegal through religion. In fact, I think the husband was allowed to kill the wife rather than divorce them, but she was allowed to divorce her husband if he was not providing her with a good amount of coffee.
Yeah.
So
it seems like an okay.
Does that seem reasonable? Death or coffee?
Yeah.
Coffee or death? Exactly. It's good stuff. So, but speaking of death and coffee, I mean, about 1511, about 50 years after it gained kind of popularity around Constantinople, over in Mecca, there was a governor.
Khair Beg.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yet another bey that's ruining things. I got to tell you, man, that guy. Ooh.
Yeah.
Anyway.
But yeah, he was the governor of Mecca at the time, and coffee was popular.
Yeah.
And as opposed to alcohol, it's bringing people up, bringing their minds up, having them think, and it's social. They're talking, and eventually it gets
crap out of them.
Yeah. If you're on top and the guys on the bottom start to talk about how unfair you are,
yes,
you're going to do something about it. So he decided, I'm going to get rid of coffee. It's Satan's drink, and we need to outlaw this.
Right. But, however, I read that the Sultan of Cairo was a huge fan of coffee.
Yeah.
And he did not take him much time to just say, this guy is being an idiot. We just need to get rid of him. And so he just simply had the governor of Mecca beheaded.
Yeah.
Just cut off his head.
This was a different time.
Yes. Well, I wonder if... No, that would never work. I can't think of any kind of... Well, just like off with his head, kind of Queen of Hearts style. Just like, nope, done, off with your head, kind of thing.
You want to outlaw coffee?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, eventually, though, really soon after that, it starts to spread out. They haven't... it's still over in Mecca. The actual plant is a closely guarded secret. But some of the beans, they've learned that if you dry them up, they can actually be shipped. The beans themselves.
And because you can't grow a plant from the beans.
Right.
So that's what they were trying to hide, was the seeds themselves.
Right. So they hide the seeds, but then they're more than happy to cook them, take the fertile, like, outside berry part off of it, and just have the seed/beans and send them out. And so they started sending them out, and one of the first places to get it was Venice.
Yeah, Venice was a big trade route for the Muslims at the time. I mean, obviously, but when it came there, it didn't take off like you'd expect it to. Originally, it was expensive, and it was for the elite, really.
Right.
And so they had other things to drink. It was just something that came along with other Muslim goods, and they said, oh, okay. But it just didn't take off.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right, and it wasn't just some of the traders. I guess the idea was that it was difficult to get coffee, any kind of bean, out of the Arab countries.
Yes.
And finally, some dude...
With the coolest name...
Go for it.
Is it Baba Budan?
Baba Budan. It is Baba Budan.
If I ever have a sandwich shop, which I probably won't, or something like that, I think Baba Budan would be a great name.
That is... You know what? If you're going to have kids, you should name them Baba Budan.
Yeah, or a great heavy metal band or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Did I tell you if I have a kid, I'm going to name him Socrates Danger?
Are you going to spell it like Socrates?
Yes, I'm going to spell it like Socrates, so when he goes to class... I'm assuming it's a boy. If it's a girl, I'll have to think of something else. But if it's a boy, it's going to be Socrates Danger. So one, you can say Danger's my middle name. But two, so when people will say like, oh yeah, hey, Socrates, that's a great name. You'll have to say, no, it's Socrates all the time. So it's going to be like my little secret joke against all the teachers.
Yeah, and then when you come to school, they're going to be like, you're the guy that named him Socrates?
Yes. So I'm going to show up and they're going to think I'm a jerk.
Yeah.
Or they'll know I'm a jerk just the moment I get there, which is good. I want people to know before I show up.
Yeah, so. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But anyways, this Baba Budan, a great story. I mean, the guy, it was closely guarded, and he managed to go ahead and get a few berries. And as the story goes, he strapped them to his stomach under his clothes, and he got him out of there and took him back to India.
Right.
Yeah.
He must have had quite a belly on him.
Yeah. Right. And so, but interestingly, I mean, they think now about 1/3 of the modern coffee that's grown in India actually comes from these seeds.
Right.
That he took. I mean, it took off over there.
Right.
And they were able to grow it. And there's even an area in India named after him now.
Right.
Yeah.
They made him a saint. And actually, if you see the little picture of the statue, he did have quite a belly of it. on him. And I'm starting to think he actually hit it in the underside of the little crease of the belly kind of thing going on there. Yeah. I'm making hand movements, and but you know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. The underside of the belly there. So maybe it wasn't the best coffee in the world, but still, people loved it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't hear too much about Indian coffee, but I don't know.
No, I've heard about you. Yeah, I've heard about Indian coffee.
Around the same time, this is a side note, but I read that around the same time, I mean, Venice had been introduced to coffee 30 years earlier, and it didn't really take off. But around this time, there was talk about it. Like I said, it was this Turkish mystique. It wasn't Christian enough. So there was a lot of people saying to the Pope Clement VIII, I believe.
Yes.
He was supposed to go ahead and outlaw this.
Right.
So he goes to take a drink of it,
right,
and went, I don't know if we should outlaw this. He liked it a lot. So he just said, if we just baptize it, we'll just baptize it.
Yeah.
And it's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So he did that. He baptized it because it was so delicious.
Well, I think it's funny that they brought it to him, obviously trying to sway his idea, because initially the people who brought it to him didn't want him to taste it.
Yeah.
And they named it the bitter invention of Satan.
Yeah.
And they presented it to him. And the smell itself compelled the Pope, Clement VIII, to actually try it. And once he did, he kind of looked both directions, kind of looked up, pointed, said like, all right, and then blessed the water, the juice as holy from that point on.
Even the Pope can't keep coffee down.
No.
Yeah.
Nor did he want to.
Yeah.
No, he wanted
to.
True. Exactly.
Yeah.
So around this time, so it becomes kind of popular. So Europeans start trying to get some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And we get, I got to tell you, one of the things I love about this whole coffee story is there's so many like daring robberies and heists and escapes with like little twigs of coffee throughout the centuries.
It's so valuable, yeah. So you just end up getting people doing crazy things to acquire it, and yeah, there's so many great stories. It's hard to cover it all.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I guess the first guy who's kind of on record as making a run for it is a guy named Peter van der Broek.
Yeah.
Who is a Dutch trader.
Visited Mocha over in Yemen.
And he got some, brought it back to Netherlands, and it died immediately because it's just too cold.
Yeah. Yeah. They brought it back and they were all excited. We're gonna make so much money off this. Yeah. Netherlands is too cold. Coffee likes to be warm.
Very much so. Well, it needs the environment. Mm-hmm. So also, I guess these Dutch East guys, how many times are we going to bring them up today?
A lot,
yeah, because they're just swirling in and did all kinds of stuff. One of the things though is that coffee beans somehow made it over to England a little bit, and they made and it was really hard to get to, so it kind of went where the money was, aka Oxford by the college, right? And so they started having, what are they called, penny? I guess because it was only a penny at the time, but penny universities outside of Oxford.
Yeah, the beginning of coffee in England, there's a whole story to that too. Yeah. But yeah, supposedly around 1650, in Oxford, the first coffee house is born, and it became a meeting place. Again, right away, it became a meeting place for social talk, intellectual talk. And they end up calling them penny universities because for a penny you could get a cup of coffee, and then you could sit among these elite intellectuals and get an education just listening to them.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
You could sit around elite intellectual college men.
Well, that's true.
Men only.
Yeah.
I don't think women were allowed in coffee houses in England for quite some time, and we're going to bring that back up because that became an issue. But
it did. There's a great we'll get there.
Okay. But yes, so it was for the men of England started to enjoy their coffee, the educated men of England.
Yeah, and it became really popular. We see England as tea drinkers, but coffee spread really fast. And it was 2 years after this that the first coffee shop opened in London, and they spread fast.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. By this is the mid 17th century. By the year 1700, there was something, I think I read 2,000 coffee houses in England. So it grew quick.
Wow.
Yeah.
So in 1658, those Dutch East India Company guys, they were taking over everything, and so they went to what's now Sri Lanka, and they took out the Portuguese one of the other groups that like to travel around quite a bit with coffee.
Yeah, and you think, oh, the poor Portuguese, but the Portuguese stole it from the Arabs.
Yeah. So yeah, everybody's been stealing it. But one of the things that the Dutch East India Company got for it was they went after the cinnamon, I guess, initially, but they found a small crop of coffee because we're getting closer to the equator, and all of a sudden it's getting hot enough.
Yeah.
And so it's one of the first. It might be the first, but it's definitely one of the first crops outside of Arab countries that it's actually successfully growing in any way, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so that Sri Lankan coffee, woo,
Yeah.
good stuff. So I guess it even got to where it started to compete with beer.
Yeah, and people don't realize how much beer, ale, wine, whatever was drank by the Europeans at that time.
Exactly, and I guess this was around the mid 1600s. So this is the time when American colonies too. So we had New York colonies and like Pennsylvania and all that stuff. So they were drinking beer with their breakfast.
Yeah, in the morning they drank all day.
Yeah,
they were completely drunk all the time. The kids were drunk. Yeah. I mean, even on that's a famous thing on the Mayflower. The one of the reasons was they didn't have access to clean water.
Right.
So a fermented beverage isn't going to have bacteria in it. It's safer to drink. Not that they knew that at the time, but they knew that it didn't make them sick.
Right.
So yeah, they were drinking constantly.
Right.
And so this is the beginning of an almost sobering up period of Europe, where they start to drink tea and coffee as opposed to
especially because coffee has such the opposite effect as beer. So I mean, it's all of a sudden everybody went from being kind of dulled and just not aware what's going on to being wide awake and ready to go and brimming with energy.
Yeah, and we have revolution. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on in Europe at this time. Mm-hmm. The Age of Enlightenment later on, which people just say coffee sparked a lot of it. Was a big impetus for it.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's why one of the things like coffee houses produced a lot of businesses as well. And one of them that came out around 1668 was the now famous Lloyd's of London, which is the biggest, I believe, the biggest insurance company on the planet, but it's at least the biggest one in the British Isles for sure. And also, something that I saw that I thought was very funny is this is where the word tips came in.
Yeah.
Because they didn't really have tips before, but this is another kind of legend thing, but I guess tips kind of came up in coffee houses as someone put out a box with a label, "To ensure prompt service."
Yeah.
TIPS. Tips.
Yeah, and even the historians, they kind of agree on this, that this was, I think, a true story.
Yes.
And so, who knows? But yeah, it's pretty interesting.
And also in London, we had finally the ladies were very much upset that only the guys were allowed in coffee houses.
Yeah, it was. This is one of my favorite. This is why I like the history of coffee, because there's so much energy, and
it's rich like the coffee itself.
Yeah, it's bean water, but it's caused so much turmoil and so many great stories. Is. Yeah, so what happened in London was the women they did not like that they weren't allowed in the coffee houses, but they also didn't like that supposedly it was thought that the coffee, unlike the alcohol, made the men less horny. And so in London around this time, the late 17th century, the women went to the king of the time, I believe it was King Charles II.
Yes.
And they formed the Women's Petition Against Coffee, and they gave it to him.
Right.
And I'm going to read an excerpt from it because it's really funny.
Okay.
But it's Old English, but it's pretty dirty, and it's really funny the language that they used at this time. But I'm going to read something from it. And
we got a quote here. Go for it.
Yeah, so this is a little, bear with me here. That our husbands may give us some other testimonies of their being men besides their beards and wearing empty pantaloons. That they no more run the hazard of being cuckolded by dildos, but returning to the good old strengthening liquors of our forefathers, and the race of lusty heroes Bagot, able to their achievements to the equal glories of our ancestors. We humbly pray that you, our trusty patrons, would improve our interest, that henceforth the drinking coffee may on severe penalties be forbidden to all persons under the age of 80, and that instead thereof, lusty, nappy beer, cock ale...
Wait, 60?
Yeah.
So,
in other words,
how many people lived past 60 then?
I think if it's still working...
Yeah.
They don't want you drinking
If it's still working, they don't want you drinking coffee.
Yeah.
So, I have a psychology background.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you were aware of this.
Yeah.
Yeah, you knew that. He knows it. Okay. So I didn't know if you, the audience, were aware of this, but
And
I
you probably don't because it's the first episode.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So unless you know me, hi everybody who knows me. That's cool.
Al's an educated. He's got a master's in psychology. So.
I do.
So he's given me many a therapy session as I am mentally a child.
It's true, and that's what makes you good at this.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But one thing I'm going to say, if I were to guess, that the men weren't going to coffee houses, but going to the brothels and saying they were going to the coffee houses.
Yeah, probably.
And going over and taking care of business, and then coming home with no energy for their wives.
Yeah.
And the wives were thinking, dang those coffee houses, when in fact they should be saying, dang those husbands for cheating.
Yeah, well, they were probably had some some lofty expectations because remember everybody was drunk all the time. So,
That's right.
Yeah, so the same thing that happens towards the end of a late night party.
Yeah.
They were probably used to a drunk guy coming home.
Yeah.
And ready for some nookie, as my grandpa would always say. But all of a sudden, this guy's coming home full of caffeine.
Yeah.
And she's all ready to go, and he says, "Oh, no, hold on, give me a pen and paper. I got to write this thing down."
Yes, I've got this. I'm deep in thought. Yeah. So
Yeah.
removing the coffee from it. So it doesn't go well because the king bans it, but this lasts an entire 11 days.
Yeah, the people were so mad about it. In fact, I don't have it here, but there's the women's petition.
Yeah.
There was a men's appeal
Yeah.
to the women's petition, and it's very almost Monty Python-esque the way it reads. I read it. It was pretty funny.
So right after this, there's a story about a battle being won, and I love this so much. There's an actual battle being won over coffee, or excuse me. I guess it's a little
coffee. The birthplace. When coffee comes into a new area, you always have a good story to go with it, and it's kind of a big deal,
right?
Because coffee is so important to people all over the world. So yeah, there was the Turks. We're in 1683,
yeah,
and the Turks are fighting the Ottoman Empire in Vienna. It's the Battle of Vienna, and there was one guy who was really smart. He spoke a lot of languages. He worked as an interpreter, and he had worked in Turkey at one point. He was a Polish guy. He spoke German really well. He spoke Hungarian, and so. But at this point, he was in Vienna, and they realized that hey, this guy could theoretically sneak into the Turkish side and get some information. So they dress him up in Turkish garb, and he swims through the Danube, and he gets over to the Turkish side successfully several times, not one time, but several times. His name was Franz George something. His real name is his Polish name was Jerzy Franciszek. Yeah, but it's the siege of Vienna. And so he goes in there with his servant several times, gets a bunch of information, comes back, and gave the people in Vienna all kinds of stuff that they would never know. And so they only had 30,000 people.
Right.
And there were 300,000 Turks.
Right.
So it was
10 to 1.
Yeah, there was no match.
Right.
And so what he ended up getting was one of the times he went over there, he was able to find the time that they were going to strike.
Right.
And so the people in Vienna set up perfectly, and they won the battle.
Right.
So the spoils of war at that point were several tents, a ton of gold,
yes,
food, all kinds of stuff, bushels of grain, and there was also a bunch of coffee beans.
Yep.
Now, nobody in Vienna knows what coffee is.
Yeah.
And this guy, Franz George, has spent a bunch of time in Turkey. He loves coffee. He knows exactly how it's brewed. He says, well, if nobody wants this coffee, I'll take it. So he takes all this coffee, opens up a coffee shop in Vienna, and initially they didn't like it. But what he did was he said, well, let's put some cream in there, let's put some honey in there, and they loved it. And yeah, so there's a statue. To this day in Vienna, all coffee houses have this guy's name up, and there's a statue of him in Vienna. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, that guy is awesome.
And they call him the patron saint of coffee houses there. So.
Right. Well, how much he got? Like, what was it? 50 or 500 bags of coffee? Because
I heard
he took
500 because there were 300,000.
Right. There, so there probably was 500 bags, but he got all the coffee because no one wanted it.
Yeah.
He got all the coffee.
Yeah.
And it made him. And but what a great guy! What a great guy!
Yeah, and the followers of him started the Coffee Guild of Vienna.
So I guess again with the Dutch around a little bit later than that. Boy, these Dutch guys are really
the freaking Dutch, man.
the freaking Dutch. They finally were able to get some seedlings, and they were actually able to get them out into Dutch-owned Batavia, which eventually led to all the Dutch coffee on the island of Java.
Yeah.
And we still call coffee Java now. Java
Yeah.
Joe's.
Yeah, I program in Java all the time.
Oh, yeah. And there's a picture of coffee on Java.
There is, yeah. It's an annoying language.
Is it someone who had so much coffee and then they just went "Ugh," and like wrote stuff down and then that became the language?
There's no other language that seems like that takes so much code to do so little. That's true. Yeah.
Okay. I'm not. So I'm on the psychology side. He's more on the engineering side. So actually, this is pretty good. So one thing that the Dutch did also that kind of turned out to be kind of dumb, I guess, is not the best move on their part, was the mayor of Amsterdam presented a young coffee plant, the actual plant that's so coveted, and he gave it to King Louis XIV of France.
Yeah, who put it in the royal garden.
Right.
And
might not have been the best move either.
Yeah, and he didn't turn his back on Amsterdam and start growing, or on the Netherlands and start growing himself. He did try to protect it.
Yeah.
But and this is my favorite guy. I love this guy. There was a French naval officer at this time. This is a famous story. He was from Martinique.
Yes.
Which my last name is Martinez. I've been called Martinique my whole life. Oh. So his name was Gabriel Mathieu Desclous, and he was
Can we call him Gabriel?
Let's call him Gabe, whatever you want.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. Maddie. Anyways, so he visits. He was living in Martinique. He had. I keep wanting to say flown his ship. No, he
sailed.
He sailed his ship. Drove his ship. I almost said that too. I couldn't find the word. Yeah, so he comes into Paris.
Yes.
And he knows that coffee. He knew about coffee from where he lived. So, but he wanted some.
Right.
And so he tried his best. And apparently he was a real charming guy.
Right.
So he charmed the ladies. And at night, what he did finally was he snuck into the garden, stole a plant for himself, hops on his ship, puts it in a pot, and watered it meticulously every day on his way back to Martinique. He stole it, and he successfully did.
Right. How did I think my favorite part of the story is how did it go on the way back?
Yeah, terrible.
Oh, okay.
So first off, there was a Dutch. He got ridiculed a lot. There was a Dutch sailor on there with him, and they kept trying to ruin the plant.
Right.
There was a pirate attack.
Where they fended it off for like a whole day. Like it took a day to fend off all the pirates.
Yeah, and it got to the point where they didn't have much water. Right. So his water rations, he took half of his rations and gave it to the plant.
This is still Gabriel. Yeah, Gabriel the man.
Yeah. So he got back and
wait, there was one other thing. There was a giant storm that they went through too, which broke, I guess, a lot of their water supply. So he gave, I guess, the last 2 or 3 days before they got there, he gave all of his water to the coffee plant.
Really? I didn't know
for the last couple of days.
So he must have been happy when he saw Martinique finally.
I would be.
Yeah. So this is 1723, and then there was a lot of issues in Martinique. There were natural disasters, but eventually it worked out, and he got it, and it was so successful that Martinique becomes a major coffee area.
Right.
And every plant on the island came from that one plant. And by 1736, it was so successful. Unfortunately, the dark side of the history of coffee, and today too, the number of slaves on Martinique was 60,000.
Yes.
So, yeah. But today, from that area, the coffee that we drink to this day comes from that one plant.
Right.
So it's kind of interesting to think that the coffee that you have is a descendant of that one plant.
Right. Yeah, it's they ended up over the next 50 years they grew 19 million coffee trees.
Really?
Off that one initial stolen cutting. So nicely done, Gabe.
Yeah.
Well done. So there's another guy though, and it's another one of these suave gentleman kind of captains, right?
Yeah.
And I'm absolutely afraid to say his last name because I do not speak Portuguese. But I'm gonna say it's Paleta because they don't really in Portuguese I don't believe they pronounce, but it's Palheta.
Okay.
And he was a Brazilian colonel, and he was sent over to French Guiana to settle kind of a border issue because I guess in that area there was a lot of problems. This was around 1727, and the governor said, "No, I don't think so. That's not going to happen. So what Paletta did was he seduced the governor's wife really hard. Like he took her. He took her.
Yeah.
And so after a couple different times, he eventually got to it where she gave him a bouquet of friendship as he left, as Paletta left, and inside of it was a bunch of different coffee beans.
Really?
A fertile coffee, not the beans, but the actual berry inside of there. And that was enough that he was able to take it back over to Brazil. And that turned into the world's now largest exporter of coffee.
Brazil? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Brazilian coffee.
In my research, that's a major story because the history of coffee in Brazil, or the history of Brazil, is the history of coffee there.
Right.
It's what built Brazil up. To this day, it's huge.
Right.
And so it's woven into their history. But I didn't actually see that story.
Yeah.
But that's huge. That's a big story here.
Yeah, no, I thought it was, so it's all these like kind of almost Don Juan ship captains that come around and are just wooing the ladies and jumping in and making heists. I mean, this is what I think when we think of like Captain Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. This is what he based the idea on. The suave captain wooed the ladies, swashbuckled, got his stuff, ran away, and was able to just produce millions.
Well, there's so many stories that you read about with the history of coffee that could be made in their own movie. Mm-hmm. Like Desclous, that could be a movie. This could be a movie.
Yes.
The whole thing could be a movie.
Yes.
Caldi could be a movie.
History of Coffee, the movie.
Yeah.
Exactly. We have history. Why not?
Starring
you?
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh, okay.
Brad Pitt.
George Clooney?
Yeah.
Sure.
John Travolta.
Maybe.
Samuel L. Jackson.
We just watched Pulp Fiction not too long ago,
Harvey
and so
Keitel.
it's kind of all coming like characters from that one movie.
Uma Thurman.
Yes, Uma
Yeah.
Thurman. Yeah, sure.
Directed by Quentin Tarantino.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
It always falls back to the thing that you just watched last.
Yeah, exactly.
I gotta tell you.
And I also noticed, this was kind of an interesting thing, in 1732, coffee had gotten so popular, Bach actually wrote the coffee cantata. I'd never heard about this, but he composed something about coffee from his own experience. His daughter was so into coffee, he wrote a song about it that's basically said, like, stop drinking coffee and go get married. And so I looked at the lyrics on it. It's interesting. This is translated from German, but it's long. But some of the excerpts are: "You wicked child, you disobedient girl, when will I get my way? Give up coffee." And she says, "Father, don't be so severe. If I can't drink my bowl of coffee 3 times daily, then in my torment I will shrivel up like a piece of roast goat." Yeah, and it goes on like that for a long time. Yeah.
So ridiculous.
Yeah.
Well, especially, of course, the goat reference too. I like. That's good.
Yeah.
Oh, going all the way back up to Caldi.
Yeah.
Later on in that year, like mid 1700s, we were talking about the Dutch East India Trading Company. So the British, and you notice the British are known not for coffee but for tea, even though they had all these coffee houses, right? So around mid 1700s, the British East India Trading Company lost out and finally gave up fighting with the Dutch East India Trading Company.
You're right.
And so they gave up trying to go after coffee, and the Brits became, I shouldn't call them the Brits.
Sure.
The British,
The dirty Brits.
The dirty Brits. No, the wonderful, lovely Brits became tea drinkers forever. Maybe they'll go back to coffee, but they're still tea drinkers.
Yeah. Yeah, so the dirty Brits basically started drinking tea, and at that point, France and the Netherlands, they just started dominating the coffee trade.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, yeah, and Britain was going to become tea drinkers because they're the ones that are trading tea.
Right.
So they had all these people living there that they could sell them to, so naturally the Brits became tea drinkers.
They became tea drinkers. And they tried to get that to go over to the colonies that they had, including the United States.
And this is when we get into the U.S.
Oh, yes, good old New York. But actually Boston, go Boston.
Yeah.
They didn't like how much they had to pay for tea. Mm-hmm. And when compared to coffee, I mean, good gosh, the coffee, even though it was expensive because it was hard to get to, was starting to come from Brazil, and it was starting to come from Martinique and some of these islands that were just south of them.
Right.
So they had better access to coffee, while the English tea that came over was super expensive and heavily taxed. So they dumped it all into the Harbor, a.k.a. the Boston Tea Party.
Yeah.
1773 Boston Tea Party.
Yeah, and
kind of driven by coffee.
Yeah, and at the time, beer was still a breakfast beverage.
Yeah.
But coffee and tea tasted better, so they were kind of competing with each other, but it became unpatriotic to drink tea at that point. And there was actually a letter from John Adams to his wife, Abigail Adams, and it said along the lines of, and I think this is a quote, "I love tea, but it's really unpatriotic for us to drink tea." So coffee started to spread into the colonies and become more popular.
And now Americans are coffee drinkers, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I've been drinking it since I was a kid. Yeah. And it also helps that at the time it was actually cheaper to get coffee from South America because they could just ship it up real quick,
right?
As opposed to going across the Atlantic. So it was cheaper to drink. It was unpatriotic to drink tea. So coffee just took hold. And now and then we started to get utensils like the coffee spoon, the coffee cup, and stuff like that. So
yes, for a good amount of coffee, because like a stein full of coffee is a little too much coffee.
Yeah, that's true. And then in the United States, once coffee takes hold, coffee shops start to show up, and it became fashionable to drink coffee. And so they followed the same London model that they had. And it became a meeting point for social economic talk. Yeah.
Yeah. In fact, although it wasn't even, they tried to get, when I say the United States tried to get coffee even closer in some place that they could own it. They needed a hot area, and they kind of getting a little tired of trading with the South because they were also trading with some of the European countries that were affected by England. So the United States decided to go the other direction to the other coast and see if they could do any coffee from over there. And they picked on these little islands out that eventually became the state of Hawaii.
Yeah.
And Hawaii grew very good coffee. In fact, the man with the best name ever on the entire planet in the history of the world, King Kamehameha, approved the first coffee planting in 1925. In 1817, and ended up finally taking hold in 1825. 1925, yeah, right. No, 1825, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. But it did take a while.
Exactly.
But they did get it, and now we have Kona coffee.
So from this part forward, for most of the 1800s, the coffee itself didn't improve as much of ways to prepare the coffee. Happened in very quick order.
Yeah, we're coming into the industrial age, so it becomes, let's invent different ways, easier ways, more industrial ways to make coffee.
Then the stuff that happened industrial-wise, the same as everything industrial started happening in the United States at about that time, around the mid-1800s, so did the changes in coffee.
Yeah.
And this is where we're introduced to Mr. Folgers.
Yeah, the Folger family was a very wealthy family in Nantucket. Things had dried up in the whaling industry over there.
Okay.
And so they said, this is after the gold rush.
Right.
So in 1850, the three brothers decided, all right, we're going to take off to San Francisco and see if we can get rich, like so many others did with the gold rush.
Right.
So they went through Panama, they get to San Francisco, through the Golden Gate, and well, not only that, they didn't have enough money to get to the Sierras and
right. Okay.
and get to the mining towns. So they found they just kind of worked there. Yeah. So James Folger, he was the second youngest of all the brothers. I think there were 9 of them, and there were 3 of them that went, I believe. And so he worked a little bit, and he helped build a coffee mill with a guy, and he realized that these guys working in the gold mines, they wanted coffee, they needed coffee, they had no way to get it.
Right.
And so he saw an opportunity. And so he decides to open up the Folgers Coffee Company with his brothers. He's 25 years old at the time.
Right. And
he ended up creating an empire.
You know, I know that some people aren't big fans of Folgers coffee, but I got to tell you, the idea I like so much, because they went there, they first started making coffee, which was just pretty much beans and water, and so they had some of the grossest coffee around that area in San Francisco, and the Folgers guys, they said, you know what, we're going to make this better. We're going to make this a better tasting coffee, and it did. It brought all the prospectors out, and then, you know, they put them in these tins so they could go take them out with them and get a better coffee that wasn't just this like muck that the poor guys would make out in like mines and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, in the Old West, you had cowboy coffee, which was the saying was, make it so thick you could float a horseshoe in it.
Yes.
And so there was just mucky ground. It was just grounded up. Yeah, and mud. Yeah. And they were known for that. So the Folgers guys wanted to make something. It was a big opportunity, and they saw it. I mean, this guy was a great entrepreneur. He saw the opportunity.
Right.
And I guess it took off really fast.
Good job, Folgers, guys.
Yeah.
Good job.
And the fun fact about him is the granddaughter of James Folger was Abigail, and she was murdered by the Manson family.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, and she was friends with Sharon Tate.
Oh my gosh! Really?
Yeah.
That's not a fun fact, but wow, that's interesting. I did not see that in the slightest.
Well, because I saw an interview with I believe the great grandson of the original Folger.
Okay.
And they merged with Procter and Gamble at one point, and he doesn't drink Folgers anymore because he actually roasts his own coffee, and so I think he wants. Sorry, Folgers, but he wants good quality coffee.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's his opinion. I don't know. I've had Folgers. It was fine. It was good stuff. It's warm. That smell, man, that just gets me up in the morning. So I'll take some Folgers.
It's the best part of waking up.
Yeah, Folgers in your cup. So I gotta say, I noticed that speaking of all this lovely Folgers coffee, your coffee looks like it's getting empty. How did you drink that entire French press? Are you good? Okay, yeah, we need to freshen up some coffee, or this guy's going to have some issues.
Coffee warm up. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be right back. Hold on a sec. So we're jumping over to 1871 after our coffee break there, and we're talking about John Arbuckle.
Oh yeah.
Isn't John Arbuckle the guy from Garfield?
Is that his name?
The real character
is John.
Yeah, Arbuckle. That's the guy from Garfield, the comic strip.
Yeah, is it him?
Yes, that's maybe it is him. He's got the curly hair.
Arbuckle?
Yeah, it's Arbuckle.
I wonder. There's. I feel like Jim Davis. Would Jim Davis have referenced this? I don't think he would.
Maybe because he's always drinking coffee, though.
That's true.
Right.
Maybe.
So I guess Arbuckle came in and did the first mass-produced coffee in a bag, and he called it Arbuckle's Ariosa Coffee.
Yeah, and it was a major hit.
Yes.
I mean, one of the reasons, and again, this goes in with the Industrial Revolution, was the paper bag was invented, and so it allowed this to be done.
Right.
And so it was cheaply able to throw it in a bag, and I still buy my coffee in a bag.
Yeah, well, I think, our biggest coffees, at least in the United States, I see it in the bag all the time.
Yeah.
Right? So just all of it comes in. They have the fresh bag and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And then right after that, pretty soon, 1886, Joel Cheek came out with a blend of different kinds of coffees that he named after a hotel in Nashville, Tennessee, and called it Maxwell House.
Yeah, it was the Maxwell, I don't know if it's called the Maxwell Hotel, but this was 1886, yeah. And then years later, in 1907, Teddy Roosevelt was there. Mm-hmm. And he tasted it, and I guess it was really good. He looked at his cup and said, "That was good till the last drop." I can't do a Teddy Roosevelt impression because I don't know what he sounded like, but that's what he said. And then Maxwell House used that as their slogan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's awesome. And then I guess basically I've always known coffee through one specific name, just because I guess I grew up in the 80s and 90s. That was the Brazilians were growing so much coffee in like the late 30s that they had to give away or sell off their extra crop, and they were approached by a Swiss company to buy all of their coffee because they knew that the coffee was going to go bad. So the Swiss invented this way to keep the coffee known now as freeze dried.
Yeah.
And that coffee company was Nestle.
Yeah. But the freeze dried thing was important because this is 1938.
Yeah.
And and by the way, I mean, Nestle is still the world's leading brand, or Nescafe. The coffee that Nestle made was Nescafe, and it remains the world's leading brand.
Right.
But at the time, the freeze dried was a great way to give it to the troops in World War II. The timing just lined up well, and so that's what they used.
Right.
And a lot of people got introduced to coffee in World War II through that, which is why after World War II, they had been drinking crappy coffee.
Yeah.
They were used to crappy coffee.
Right.
And it took a long time until coffee in the United States was good again.
Right. In fact, a lot of the troops that were coming back preferred the crappy coffee over the tastier coffee. And kind of they made fun of the more aromatic European blend coffees compared to just the sludge that they had to drink.
Yeah, well, the freeze-dried was modern, and I guess after World War II, everything was modern. You know,
Yes.
all the new appliances, everything was spacey.
Yes.
And the freeze-dried crystals, it was like space coffee. Right. And so I think that was good enough for the American taste. Right. It was more of a utility. It wasn't necessarily what it is today, which later on Starbucks came around and said, we're going to make it social again. Right. But that's what coffee was. It was like, that was the past.
In 1966, this is where we get kind of more the modern idea of fighting between coffee owners. And there's quite a bit of it. But in 1966, there's a guy named Alfred Peet. And he opened up a place called Peet's Coffee in Berkeley, California, which we're really close to, and started the specialty coffee industry. And man, did it really, really take off and go well. But he wanted people to have a good cup of coffee. And like it was known for being really strong coffee, too.
Yeah, I mean, his dad was Dutch. Or he was, so his dad had a roastery in the Netherlands.
Right.
And so it was still, coffee hadn't been as industrialized and freeze-dried over there. So they had, Pete's decided to bring it back.
Right. Really good coffee.
Yeah.
And then in 1971, this guy, the kid, or Alfred Peet, shared his roasting style with 3 friends. And so remember these names: Jerry Baldwin, Zev Ziegel, and Gordon Bowker.
Yeah, and you might know them because they went up to Seattle and opened the first Starbucks.
Right. And the thing with the Starbucks, though, was they did not sell specialty coffees. They just sold beans.
Yeah, the idea was that you're supposed to take care of that at home to make it fresh.
Right. And so around 1972, they came out with the automatic drip coffee maker, also known as Mr. Coffee, which I wasn't alive yet when it came out, but I grew up knowing Mr. Coffee as the percolator.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, it was so popular. They actually had Joe DiMaggio. I mean, if you're older, you remember this. They had Joe DiMaggio market this guy. And it was so popular by the late 1970s, they were selling 40,000 of them a day.
Right.
Yeah, it was, I mean, to this day, they're used all the time. I mean, they're still selling.
Wasn't Joe DiMaggio the everyday man that married Marilyn Monroe?
Yeah.
Nice. I remember that from somewhere. Interesting. So, in 1982, there was a guy who was selling the drip coffee makers, and he was a very good salesman, and he went by the name of Howard Schultz, which if you're aware of any Starbucks kind of ideas or what, you will know that name because he was hired on by Starbucks as the director of marketing. And he went to Milan and around Italy and discovered all these wonderful, coffee houses where everybody got together and had different kinds of coffee. And so he came back to America and said, "We got to try this, guys. This is great." So he was talking to the 3 owners of Starbucks, and he said, "We got to try this." But the 3, Jerry, Zev, and Gordon, said no.
Yeah, they said we don't sell coffee, we sell beans.
Right. And so in 84, Schultz said, "Forget this," and he quit. And he went over. He left, and at that same time, the original owners of Starbucks decided that they were going to buy out Peet's, right? So the original Starbucks owners now own Starbucks and Peet's, coffee.
Right. Well, the original owners of Starbucks bought Peet's. Howard Schultz started his own coffee company.
Right, and I believe they were called Il Giornale.
Yeah, he copied the Italian way of doing it. Coffee was really popular over there. And in Italy at the time, there was 200,000 coffee shops.
Right.
Cafes, whatever you want to call them, on every corner.
Right.
And it was a big part of the social thing. But yeah, so they buy Peet's. He starts this Italian thing, which is why we have what Howard Schultz said is investors would say, wait a minute, you're going to sell coffee consumption is low in this country. You're going to sell it with these weird Italian names that nobody's heard of.
Yes.
He said, that's exactly what I'm going to do. Yeah. And he did. And later on, he went and bought Starbucks back.
Right.
For $3.something million.
$3.8 million, yeah.
Yeah, how could they say no? What a great price.
What a great price, yeah.
For Starbucks.
And so he bought, and is now currently the CEO, I believe, of Starbucks.
The chairman, yeah.
Yeah, the chairman of the board.
But yeah, so the original owners of Starbucks own Peet's.
Yes. Pete doesn't own anything.
And the original owners of Starbucks don't own Starbucks.
No.
Some other guy, Howard Schultz, does.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you want original Starbucks coffee, go to Peet's.
Yeah.
If you want Starbucks coffee that's based after the idea of coffee in Italy, go to Starbucks.
Yeah.
And if you want to go talk to Alfred Pete, I think he's retired somewhere on an island.
I would be.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. So, and that kind of brings it up to today. I mean, really, man, there's a lot of history behind coffee.
Yeah, we could literally, this could be a month-long thing. I mean, we could talk about this forever.
Absolutely.
I mean, there's a lot of things. If you want to look up more, I would search more about the Haitian Revolution, which we really didn't talk about, which was all about slaves and working conditions over in what's now Haiti.
Yeah.
There's the Clou, however you say his name, Matthew Duclos. That was a great story. The Battle of Vienna. There's all kinds of great stories, and they could all stand on their own as their own story, their own movie.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and I mean, it's interesting that from the beginning, coffee has been sparked social change.
Yes.
The French Revolution.
Yes.
I mean, we talked about the sobering up of Europe. This coincides with the same time that the French Revolution happened.
American Revolution too.
The American Revolution, yeah. It was, people stopped, people don't realize how much alcohol was consumed by Europeans before coffee came in, and tea. It's unbelievable. Right. People were drunk all the time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, today, some of the facts are that there's 1.6 billion cups of coffee drank every day.
Right.
Brazil still produces 30% of the world's coffee, and the U.S. imports 27% of the world's coffee. So, we almost drink as much as Brazil produces, and it's second to only oil as the most traded commodity in the world. So, I mean, it's unbelievable. It's taken 1,000 years, but it's unbelievable where it's gotten to today.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's interesting that because it's been so important, it's brought out the worst of humankind, but it's brought out the best.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's been used to overcome. It's been used for necessary social change,
right?
Which seems to never end, or never be an ending need for.
Right.
But it's also brought out the worst because it's when you have something so precious, and greed gets into it. It plays such a big role in the history of slavery and everything.
Right. Yeah. No. If you look up coffee, there's a whole bunch about slavery and the slave trade. So it's we tried to keep it a little light and go through the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I gotta say, I thought that was a pretty good history of coffee.
Oh yeah, my name's Johnny.
Okay, and I'm Al, and we will catch you next time on the History of Things.
Thanks for listening.